This is Ed Robinson, Kensington College, continuing on our lessons of VBA. We're talking about variables. We discussed basic variable names and how we can allocate them and so on. Now we'll talk about swapping two values to show you how you might use a variable, why you would want to use a variable inside a program. Let's say we've got two numbers, 2 and 3, in our spreadsheet like this, and I've just got them allocated here, 2 and 3. Now we want to be able to swap those two values, and so the 3 will appear up here and the 2 will appear down there. So you might think, well, maybe we could start off by using something like this, that range A2 value is equal to range. Now don't forget, it works from right to left. So what is the value of range A2 value? Let's take a look. Over here it's a 3, and what's the value of here? At the moment the value of A1 is 2. So we try to swap the two variables, and you might think that's a good start. Does that swap them around? Well, no. Let's see what actually happens. Can you guess what's going to happen? Because the range A2 value, which is 3, is going to be placed into range A1 value. Let's see if that's true. I think I'll put a breakpoint in here so we can watch it in slow motion, one step at a time. So I'm going to now click the button, and it should stop here, and actually it should show us the value here is 2, which it is, and the value there is 3. So that's the 2 and the 3. Now what's going to happen next? Can you predict? So if we press the F8 key, which I'm going to do, it puts the value of this into this. Now watch over here as well. Ready, go. They're both been made equal to 3. Well, I can check that by holding my mouse on here and mouse on here, and they've both got the value of 3. Now that's not what we want. What is the problem? The problem, I'll just stop that program by clicking the reset. The problem is that we've lost the value of A1. So there's a Q for a variable. So let me start off by saying dim x as integer, a whole number, and I'll just click away, and you'll see it capitalize the dim. So please, as I mentioned, make sure you always type in small letters to make sure your spelling is correct, because then it corrects it for you. Now what is the problem? The problem is that this range A1 has been lost. So hello, let's port it into a variable. So I'm going to say that x equals that value. So, and by the way, this is how you should get used to doing control drag in VBA. Makes your editing life a bit easier. So I've highlighted it. Now I'm going to press the control key and then just drag that up and let go of the mouse, and that puts that in there. It'll save you a lot of time. Well, let's see how that's worked so far. I'll put a breakpoint here and then click the, now I better go back and put that back to a 2 as it was before. Okay, so I click the button. Now range A1, of course it's 2. I've got the F8 key, so I'm going to hold my mouse on the X, and it says it's 0 at the moment. That yellow line means it has not been executed yet. So when I press the F8 key, it places the value of the 2 in here. So X is safely stored. Now I'd like you to remember that and forget it. So we'll come back to it later, that X has the value of 2 stored in it inside the computer program. Now you remember what this line did. 3, it does exactly the same thing. It actually obliterates the value in A1. I'll press the F8 key, and you can see that it's got the value of 3. They've both got the value of 3. This is not that the program is not complete yet. We have to do something else, because X has got the value safely inside the program of 2. So the question is, how do we put it into cell A2? Well, it's not so difficult. I'll just stop the program. Can you think of what you might do next? You want to put the value that you've stored in the X, you want to put that into the cell A2. Okay, simple enough. So I'm going to control drag this down here, and then I'll put that equal to what? equal to x. So that means the value of x, which is 2, is going to be placed into this cell here, which is range A2. Right, now let me just run it, and I'll put the 2 back in here and then see if it works. Bingo. So the 3 and the 2 are, oh, by the way, if you click it again, you'll be back to where you started from. So let's see how that runs in slow motion. I'm going to put a breakpoint here, and then I'm going to click the command button. Okay, this has got the value of 2, which is A1, and you won't see anything happen on the spreadsheet. It will be stored internally in that variable. I'll press the F8, and you can see that x has been given, stored in the computer, the value of 2. Now, in this example, this line here, the 3, you see, will be placed. You can watch over here. The 3 is placed into cell A1. So these are both got the value of 3. Now we need to therefore move the value of 2, which is stored in here, into this A2, which is what this line here says. At the moment you can see it's 3, and x has got the value of 2. As I'm going to press the F8, you can watch both the spreadsheet and this, and the 2 you see is placed into A2. So that's the program to swap two variables, and as I showed you, if you keep clicking it, it keeps swapping them. So the point of this is really to show you what a variable is and how they are used. A variable is used for storing values inside a computer. Something at version now. Let's talk about the MsgBox. The MsgBox is a nice way of outputting to the screen in Excel. So I'll just copy that bit of code, MsgBox simple. You can do this from the manual, and then I'm just going to replace it with that. And basically it should just produce a MsgBox saying the word simple. So a MsgBox, MsgBox, and then the name of the text, it's inverted commas. Now a MsgBox always requires text. You're not supposed to be able to just say MsgBox 3, for example. We'll come to that. But generally it requires a string or text, as we say. Okay, let's try another bit of code from there, which is the this bit here, and I'm going to explain this. I'll copy that and paste that into the code, or if you don't have the manual, you can just type that in yourself. Dim, I'm going to explain that in later why we're going to dim a variable. But MsgBox, now take a look at this. The value of x is, well, let me just see what it does. The value of x is 2. Notice there's a space in there between the is and the 2, which is the space here. Now you've heard about concatenation in Excel when you use an ampersand, the and sign, that joins together two bits of string. So this is your first bit of string, the value of x is. This is the second bit of the string, which is concatenated using the ampersand. Now what's this thing here? It means convert to string. It used to be something like this in the old days, which caused a little bit of trouble, but in this case it's C string, convert to string. Convert to string because x indeed, as you can see, is an integer, a whole number. Now you know the MsgBox requires string or text, so you must convert it to a string before you can concatenate it, and that gives you the value of x is 2. Now I say you must convert it to string. I guess I'm not really telling the truth, because indeed if you do this, that's not supposed to work, but whoops, it does. So you see, Excel is being quite forgiving. It's taken the value of x and done an implicit conversion. Implicit meaning behind the scenes, I guess. Understood. Implicit means understood. That that's the beauty of VBA. It can be quite forgiving sometimes. So well, you'd think, well, I can't just put an integer on there, surely it's got to be a string. Oh, that seems to work as well. So it's being quite forgiving, isn't it? It's taking an integer and outputting it as if it were a string. The message box can be, I use it quite a lot actually, even in more developed programs, when you're trying to work out what's going on inside your program and what the current value is. I find it a very good way of debugging your program. Debugging meaning work out if there's something wrong with it. I'm now going to explain the meaning of option explicit and the corresponding dim. First of all, I'm going to make this variable, I'm going to call it, for example, sales instead of X. And a little tip here, if you double click it, it highlights the word, and then I can just copy that word and paste to my heart's content. Well, that one's, I'll just put one variable here as an output. I'm being a bit cheeky because it's an integer at the moment. So I'll just message box sales, and that should just do exactly what we did before. Message boxed out a value. So sales is a variable which is taken on the value of 2, and then you message box out that value. Perhaps I'll just put a C string in here, CSTR, for good programming practice. Another little tip, if you press the end key, it'll take you to the end without looking, and if I just run that again, and then it gives the same result. You notice how I typed in small letters in here and it capitalized it, so now I'm on the right track. Now we're going to be talking about what this thing here means. And what it means is it checks the spelling. It makes sure that sales is spelt correctly, because here you've declared it as an integer, but you've also declared its spelling, and you want to make sure its spelling is correct throughout the program. So for example, if I misspelt it in here and then run the program, it kicks up an error. So it's useful for error, finding your errors in your program. So I'll just return that to stop the program and press the undo button. That's always a good one. The undo will take you back to where you were. Now let's say I didn't have option explicit in here. Before I do that, I'm going to show you something else. I'm going to diverge and talk about commenting. Now commenting means when you put an apostrophe in front of something like this, an apostrophe, and it goes green, that line takes no further part in your program. Now what I tend to do is to put in comments, say I'm now going to such and such, and I can use that for later on. I do that frequently when I'm starting off programming. If something is becoming a bit complex, I settle in my mind what I'm trying to do, and I put a comment in there and hopefully do it, and I can still look back on that comment. So if you tend to forget what you're doing sometimes, then you can use comments. Now you can actually comment out lines, a whole block at a time, and I'll show you how to do that. So for example, if I want to comment out all of this, I would then click, if you can see it up there, it's the comment button, comment block, it says. Now it doesn't, so if I click it, you'll see it comments out all of that. In fact, if I click the button now, it'll do absolutely nothing, because there's no, all the code has been commented out. It's just the same as if you deleted it. But I also have the uncomment button up here, so I can uncomment the block, and now it's back as it was. Where is that? These two, you won't find them up there by default. So if I go to view and then toolbars, a little bit tricky to find sometimes, and customize, and you'll see here the edit commands, and you can find them. There it is there, the comment block, so you can simply drag that onto your toolbar. I'll just drag that off again, I don't want another one, and then you can close your, so they're two useful ones. And another, while I'm mentioning that, and I'll come back to that, but tools, options, auto syntax check, I think that it's a good idea to uncheck that, and it avoids all these red lines you'll get if you're halfway through a cut and paste, and it is just a nuisance. So get rid of auto syntax check from the options as well while we think of it. Okay, so now I've got this program. Just to confirm that's still working, it produces the value of x is 2, and I've got option explicit and so on. And I showed you just now that if you misspell something, it'll kick up an error. Well, let me try this. I'm just going to get rid of option explicit by putting an apostrophe in front of it, and get rid of this one as well by putting that, and so on. Now there's no spell checking in operation, so just watch what happens here. I'm going to get rid of something. I'm going to misspell it here. Right now, what do you think is going to happen? Will the program stop? Well, no. Let's see what actually happens. This is if we press the button, it gives me nothing, as in 0. So why is that? Because the program thinks that that's a new variable. It doesn't think it's sales. It's not checking up on you. It thinks you've made another variable called sles, and that's got a value of 0. So this is the sort of thing we want to avoid, because they are the hardest bugs to find in your program. It's continued on, it's given an answer, but even worse, it's giving you the wrong answer, and you don't really know why at the moment. So let's go and play safe. I'm going to take off the comment here. Now the rule is this: whenever you have option explicit, you must use a dim. Dim means you declare. You're declaring that this is an integer. This is really defining the value of sales as equal to 2, but get that word, declaring. So once again, when you have option explicit, you must declare your variables. That's the rule. Remember that. Use option explicit. You must declare all of your variables. In other words, you're saying how they're going to be spelt in future. So I strongly recommend you always use option explicit. When people don't use it, you take a look at their code. If you're looking at doing some consultancy and you're looking at people's code, they're very keen on not using. They say, "Whoa, this dimming of variables, what a nuisance! I don't want to keep doing that all the time." And I can understand why. It takes a little bit of time, but that's the whole idea of programming. You're not programming for when the program works. You're programming for when it doesn't work, and you're making provision for when the program doesn't work. And so always, please, use option explicit, and therefore always declare your variables, because you can go in and try and put option explicit into someone's code, and it explodes in front of you. There's just problems all over the place. So it makes it much easier to find. You've got to imagine you might have a program that's got thousands of lines of code, and you want to know why something is not working. That's one way of eliminating the errors. So always use option explicit. And on that note, if you want it to appear automatically in a new session, what is a new session? A new session is when Excel starts up. That's called a new session. So if I go to Tools and Options here, you can see this one here, which is Require Variable Declaration. That says that makes you use, well, no, sorry, it includes option explicit in the top of your code here. It won't do it now. It will do it if you set that option. Then when you do that, if you start the new session, then option explicit will appear automatically for you. Let's take a look now at other variable types. We've already talked about an integer, and an integer holds up to around about 32,000, I think. Yeah, so an integer is 32,000. We'll talk about a long rather than an integer means it can hold up to about, what's that, 2 billion, for goodness sake. That should be enough for your requirements. But be careful, you can run out of, if you try and iterate through all the cells of a spreadsheet, or rows of a spreadsheet, and there's a million of them, you'll cause an error if you're using an integer, for example. So be careful, make sure you've got enough capacity. We talk about a single, which is a decimal, and a double is also a decimal. A boolean, it can be true or false, and a variant can be anything. It's like the queen in chess, if you like. It can be an integer, and we'll talk about those in a moment. A date type, and so on. So what you can do is just from the manual, or you can type this in, just copy all of this code here and put that into your button, and then paste it over the top of that, and then I'll just run the code for a start. So if I run it, you can see all the values have been placed here. Now let's take a look. You've got dim LG. You can call it LG, you can call it whatever you like. Well, not within reason of the variable restrictions. You can't have a number in the front, for example. So LG is a long. That's a large integer. SG, and that you can see is 205. Not very large, is it? But that'll do for the moment. You can see that SG is a single. That means it's a decimal, and dB is a decimal as well. You can see the two decimal values over here. But single is, well, double is a more accurate version of a single. So if you want to be safe, you could just use doubles. It used to be, we used to have to watch out for memory saving considerations, but these days you don't really. So perhaps you should just use double, and maybe you should even use long as well. Boolean, you can see, is either true or false, and you can see it's got the value of true at the moment. Now this variant here, this variant says you can take on any value. Now I've allocated a decimal number to it, but you could put a bit of text there, you could put a date and so on. So it's got flexibility. Now why a variant can take on any value? You might say, well, let's use variants all the time. Well, that's fine, but the trouble is, once again, it's the idea of trying to find bugs in your program if it goes wrong. So if you declare something as an integer and it's got like 4.3, it'll kick up an error. So this is another way of safeguarding your program, not to use variants. Having said that, which means I'm going to contradict myself, when you're using Excel, let's make that a bit bigger to show you the data. When you are using Excel in particular, rather than Access or C++ or something, you're picking something up from the spreadsheet, and you don't really always know what it's going to be. It could be a bit of text, and it could be an integer, it could be a decimal, and so on. So a variant, it's a good idea. We can be excused for using them within Excel. A variant is what we call the default value. So if I just get rid of as variant here, does the program still work? I'll just change this to show that I'll put that equal to a bit of text, and then if I run that, does it? Yes, it still works. It's been put on the left, so you know it's a bit of text rather than numbers, which are on the right now of the cell. So we've not said what it is, so you can see it's the default type. One other thing, if you want to dim your variables on one line, for example, I'm just going to press the delete key and bring that up, and I'm going to put a comma in there. Is that just the same? Let me just click my button. Yes, it looks much the same. So LG is, and so on. So what you can do, you can put all your longs on one line, all your singles on another line, and so on, just to set out your code and make it more readable and organized. Now, but there is a bit of a danger in that. Now, if I say here that dim LG, I'm going to get rid of that for the moment. Now the question is, what type is LG? Is it a single? Well, you could be well excused for thinking that it is. They're both singles, and if it's in C++ or C# or something, they would actually both be singles. Well, they're not single, but they'd be the same variable type. Now get that word type. Type, T-Y-P-E, is the type. This is a double type. This is a single type. This is a Boolean type. And if you want some help on that, you can just press the F1 key, and that should bring up some help for the Boolean data type. And you can read a bit more about that and the integers, and you can work out, you find out what their exact capacity is if you're interested. So F1 for the help on that. Now there is, as I was saying, we said, is this are they both singles? And the answer is no. So what do you think it's going to be, that LG? Yes, it's going to be a variant, just the same as we had a variant here, dim VR with nothing there. LG is in fact a variant. So that can be a trap, and I do remember myself falling into that trap and thinking it was, say, an integer, and in fact it was a variant. And if it was an integer and it had a value of 1.2, it didn't kick up an error, and it took me a long time to find my error. So be careful when you're declaring variables where they could be a variant. You might have noticed as you were typing that IntelliSense comes up. For example, if I were typing here and I just type here a space, then you'll see all of the types will come up. You should be able to find the double type and the integer type as an integer and so on, somewhere here. There we are. And by the way, you could either double click on that, or let's say I just press the D, O, and then there we are. That's making that suggestion. But if I press the Enter key, it will start a new line. But if I just press the Tab key, I'll do that, it will not start a new line and just put that variable in. Of course, we don't need that as well. So that's IntelliSense for the variables type, but we can also have IntelliSense if we come down here and just after we type a full stop, you'll see they appear here. Now these flying green bricks are methods, we'll call them, and the ones with a finger pointing on something or other are the properties. So if we were to select that one by double clicking on it or pressing the Tab key and so on. Okay, so that's IntelliSense, which is very, very useful. There is an option to turn it on or off in the tools options if you want to particularly turn it either on or off. Let's take a look at some arithmetic operations. You'll be pleased to know they're much the same as within Excel. So if I just copy this bit of code into my, I'll put into my Excel in here, into the VBE, into the Visual Basic Editor, and then I can run that code. Well, let's see. I'll just get rid of this. Here's a tip in Excel. If you want to delete some stuff, you grab hold of the fill handle and just go in reverse, and that will delete it for you. If we put in the value of, say we put in the value of 8 here, let me just run the code and see it works okay. It's putting in the value of 9. Well, let's see how that worked. I'll just delete the value of 9 here, and then I'll put a breakpoint in here, and then I'll press the F8 key, and you can see, oops, I should have run the program. I'll just stop that and run the program. It runs down to here, and then I can see that X has got the value of nothing at the moment, and if I press the F8, it picks up the value of 8 into the value of X. So it takes the value of X here, multiplies by 3, and then divide by 4. So 8 by 3 is 24, divided by 4 is 6, and then finally you add on the 3 just like you do in Excel, and I'll press F8 and it should plonk the value of 9 into that cell. You can try other expressions. For example, you might want to include x to the power of 2. That's the caret, that's x squared, so if that were equal to 3, you'd have 3 squared would be 9. In this case here, you could check out those values. You could try that for yourself. 16 divided by x. Now notice that's going to do the divide by x first, which is going to be the value of x, which is, if it were 18, 8. In this case 16 divided by x minus 1, so you take the 8 and then, so we've got the value of x is 8 built into the program this time, so 8, so we take the 16 and divide by x, so there's no bracket there, so this happens first. So that's 16 divided by 8, which is 2, subtract 1, which is 1. So that's the value of 1 you're getting here. In this case, you're doing that operation first because you've got brackets, just like in Excel. So you take the value of 8, add 1 is 9, 18 divided by 9 gives you the value of 2. We could mention at this stage our input box. Input box we take here using the word input box value. Now value is what we call the prompt, which is required, by the way, it's not optional. So the value, you see, that text there will appear up here when you run this code. Now the value x is the value that you type in here when you're running this, and therefore you will message box out the value of x. And you should find when you do that that you get a message box appearing with the value 3. Notice that I've dimmed x as a string because this input box is expecting a string. So you're message boxing out the value that's returned. String is the text type that we were talking about before. There's a couple of exercises you could try. Instead of outputting in a message box, place the value in cell A1 and write some code to convert centigrade to Fahrenheit. So if you put 100 centigrade in here, then you get the output, which should be 212 if you've done it correctly, as the Fahrenheit equivalent.